السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد. Today we'll speak of the role of the woman as a mother and some aspects of motherhood, the duties, and so on and so forth. Is first of all, there used to be some tariqah groups where, when we speak of tariqah, it's a science of the batin, whereas the Sharia is the science of the zahir of Islam. There were some spiritual practices which were based on obeying the parents. And these spiritual practices were extrapolated from the Quran and from many ahadith that exist. But they say this path, if you want to be part of this tariqah, although I only knew one person who claimed such a tariqah, and he's passed away now. But in this tariqah he said, the condition is obeying the parents no matter what, in absolute terms. Although the word absolute here I have to alter here. And so they wouldn't pick anyone, they wouldn't choose anyone, they would only choose those who they see as able to practice this prescription, which is obeying the parents. And the rationale is, when you obey your parents no matter what, your ego becomes suppressed and eliminated. And that was the aim. Because when the ego is suppressed, the heart can manifest Allah's attributes more and more. But when the heart is preoccupied with self-centeredness and one's own desires and lusts and worldly preoccupations, one can't grow spiritually. One is veiling oneself from Allah's attributes. But this is very difficult, to obey your parents no matter what. Because, for example, you want to study languages, but your parents want you to study, for example, medicine. You obey them. Look, this is not wajib from a Sharia point of view. According to the Sharia, you can't do something which disappoints your parents. Something which in your culture, in your urf, the common lay person would say, this behavior of yours is expectant to cause disappointment or anger of your parents. That the Sharia says is haram. So for example, stretching your legs in front of your parents in some parts of the world would be seen as disappointing your parents and would be haram. In other parts of the world, it wouldn't be seen as such. It's a urfi criterion. But the criterion is, whatever expectedly would lead to their disappointment or anger, it's haram for you to do. That's the Sharia. So for example, according to the Sharia, if you wanted to do medicine and not the subject your parents want, that wouldn't be seen as haram. But in the tariqah, in this particular tariqah, it would be seen as a tariqah haram action. Because your parents wanted you to do something, you didn't do it. As I say, this spiritual practice, they don't exist today. But it was a tariqah once upon a time. There were groups who focused on this one prescription. This one prescription constituted their tariqah. For example, some tariqahs are pivoted around ma'rifatun nafs, some on the nafilah. Imam Khomeini's tariqah is based on the salat, its zahiri and batini dimensions. And the book Adabu Salat is Imam Khomeini's tariqah protocol. So here, yes, when your parents tell you to do something haram, there you don't obey. That's the exception. But even then, when you disobey them, you do it in a way that they don't become disappointed or angry. That's important. So here you see the importance of, now here, then they said, between the parents, the Urafa would say, especially the mother. You're never 100%, but try to obey her more. Try not to compromise obeying the mother. The father too, you shouldn't disobey, and according to the tariqah, do whatever they want. But sometimes, if you can, and there's a choice between the two, the mother has priority. And this has been extrapolated from ahadith, where someone wanted to compensate for their sins, and the Holy Messenger said that, do you have a mother? He said no. They said, do you have a father? He said yes. He said, go and be a servant to your father. Whatever he says, you do. And then when he left, the Holy Messenger said, if the mother was alive, it would have been easier. So this shows that priority here with the mother, and one's progression maybe can be deemed faster through obeying the mother. In any case, here one has to obey them. Now, from a Sharia point of view, that's a definite. With the jurisdiction that the Sharia has given, if you go into the tariqah, obeying them would be much difficult. Now, here, the mother has to appreciate that nature, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has assigned nature in such a way that the primary responsibility of the child is with the mother. It's the way nature works, this has happened. But at the end of the day, Allah may have assigned nature in another way, but this is the way He chose. And therefore, nature dictates that the primary responsibility, the primary teacher of the mother, of the infant, of the newborn infant, baby, child, is the mother. And it's like a job which the employer is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the employee is the mother. Now, here, the health of the ummah is something which Allah, His rules and regulations, the laws that Allah gives, ultimately is for the betterment and for the best interests of the growth of any ummah, any community, any nation, whatever. And here, children are the future of any given ummah. And Allah's laws and regulations are so that the ummah survives materialistically, spiritually, reaches salvation. That's the ultimate goal behind these rulings that we have. And since the children are the future of the ummah, and it's our children which would lead to either the salvation or the wretchedness of the ummah, here the woman as mother has to appreciate that this is a very grand responsibility, because she has the primary responsibility here. The child is born from her and is nurtured from day one through her, and the nurturing starts from day one. And if the child was to end up being a good child, that would be a righteous legacy for the mother. So when the mother passes away, every good deed that the child did as a result of the mother's proper nurturing, it's as if the mother is doing them. And therefore in barzakh, the mother is still benefiting, is still growing, even though she's passed away. The grandmother too will have a lesser share. The great-grandmother will have a lesser share. It keeps on getting less and less. So even though the mother may have passed away, because of what the child is doing, it's as if the mother is helping the ummah, is contributing to the betterment of the ummah. And God forbid if the child is not, as a result of the mother's nurturing, is not properly nurtured, that would be not a righteous legacy, but God forbid it would be a vicious legacy. And even though the mother's passed away, her condition is deteriorating in barzakh because of the actions of the child. In any case, this child is born from the mother. Nature has assigned it such, and therefore automatically the mother has this primary responsibility in relation to them. So the mother is the child's first classroom, she's the first teacher, and the mother, the woman as a mother, has to appreciate and be grateful that they have been granted such a nobility which is much more than that of the father. The father's contribution is in relation to the preliminaries, for example, the expenses and so on and so forth, providing for the medium. So it's kind of indirect. But that which the mother does, it's all direct and molding and shaping and building directly this child. Okay, Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayhi, has said that the affinity which a child has towards the mother, it has to no one else. That's nature. Allah has assigned it like that. It's not a choice. So it's like Allah giving you a job, for example. The mother has to be honored with such a job. Because if she didn't decide, she didn't pick this job. Nature, the way Allah has assigned things, that you will be given this job if you were to bear a child. The affinity which a child has towards the mother, it has to no one else. And when in the laps of their mother, all the child's wants and wishes are channelized in the mother and through the mother. What does that mean? Whatever the child wants, it wants it through the mother. Whatever the child wishes for, it wishes for it through the mother. i.e., the child's access to, in this world, from day one onwards, especially in the early years, is through the existence of the mother. So you can imagine the affinity and association it has. It's very strong. When it wishes something, it's through the mother. And it starts with milk, for example. But then think the inner wishes, the inner desires, everything. It's all through. The mother is generating these wishes for the child. And sees everything through the eyes of the mother. The mother's talking, her ethical temperament, her actions exerts an effect on the child moment to moment. Hence, it's inevitable that the child that is in the mother's laps, which is the first classroom, if she, the mother, is pure and refined, the child will from the outset be nurtured properly and will develop with these good traits and will do taqleed, the Farsi word, and will emulate the mother. The child does taqleed through the mother, and the Imam says, and this is the most superior of taqleeds. Do you know when we do taqleed from a marja, that's very important. We learn our wajibat, muharramat, but it's lesser, it's inferior to the taqleed that a child does to the mother. So, and will develop those good traits, and the child will emulate the mother, and this is the most superior of taqleeds, and will be nurtured with their mother's injections. For example, when the mother speaks, strokes, all these injections which constitute the most superior of injections. For example, the child is injected a vaccine in the 2nd month, the 4th month, 6th month. These are all good. But the injections that he or she receives from the mother, you can't compare it with these. So here, there's a very heavy responsibility. It's a grand responsibility, but it's very heavy. And nature has assigned it such that this individual, the woman firstly, because one is a woman before a mother, and then this woman as a mother. It's like 2 different criteria required. It's a heavy responsibility. And like with all heavy responsibilities, rationally, it's mandatory to act quickly, as quickly as possible. Heavy responsibilities demand this. Rationality dictates that when the responsibility is heavy, you have to work right quickly, as soon as possible. For example, if I have a common cold, I may say, for example, okay, I'll go later, I'll go to a doctor's later. But if I have, let's say, malaria, then I would say I have to go now. See, the severity of the situation dictates that I go right now. I can't delay it, even rationally speaking. Imam Khomeini has said that during their infancy and when nurturing is easily molded into the child. Because in the very early years, the child is very moldable. It's very easy to nurture and have a very maximum effect. They accept good and bad quickly. And so you must start nurturing them in your laps from the outset, being responsible with respect to their actions. A well-developed and brought-up child may lead an ummah. They may lead the ummah. Alternatively, God forbid, a misnurtured child may lead to the ummah's wretchedness and corruption of society. Therefore, don't just look at them as a child. This child, the potential, they can lead the ummah towards salvation, they can lead it to corruption. So, the summary so far is that it all starts with the mothers, and the children, they emulate their mothers first. They are the first teacher. The laps of the mother is the first classroom. They scrutinize their mother's actions, traits, morals, body language. They wish, they want through the mother. And so here the responsibility is grand. The smallest error can have consequences. God forbid if the mother was to lie. Now sometimes the child, through their rationality, understands the mother is lying, but even as a 2-year-old, they interpret the body language that the mother is lying. Don't think just because the child doesn't understand the concept of lying, you can lie in front of them or speak impolitely, the spouses, to one another in front of the child. No, that it has a very negative effect. I mean, sorry for giving this example, but these things sometimes have to be said. That we have a lot of hadith on this, that even, for example, when the mother and father want to be together and there's a child or infant in the house, they shouldn't hear any sound, any word during the act. It has to be done that they don't have access to listening. Do they understand? Do they understand what is being done, like say in the bedroom? Of course not. But why does the tradition say if they hear, they will become an adulterer? Now, here it means potentially they will be an adulterer. But even there, the thing is their soul has been contaminated. It's the soul of an adulterer because of what the parents have done. Now, they may never commit the physical act of adultery, but the soul is that of an adulterer. That's actual. Whether they commit adultery, that's potential. That's other parameters are at stake. But here, they don't understand, but it has the effect. So when parents speak impolitely to one another in front of the child, it'll have the effect. If they lie, the child doesn't understand, they're 2 years old, it'll have the effect. You look at how much the child can be messed up. The lapse of the mother is their classroom. She's the first teacher, and this teacher, the effect it has, no other teacher until the end of their life will have such an effect. And it's because of that, the adultery issue I was speaking, that even during pregnancy, it's very makruh towards the second half especially, for this act to happen. Look, the Sharia appreciates this. There are many things, many adab we have. For example, saying the adhan and the iqamah when they're born. In the tariq it says, say the adhan and iqamah. The Sharia says when they're born. In the tariq it goes beyond that. It says when they're in the womb, towards the latter months. Start it there. Look, all these have an effect. The responsibility is a lot. Yes. Although I don't want to scare you or anything or anyone, but this should be seen as an honor that one has been given this. And if a mother, for example, doesn't have good, let's say, materialistic circumstances, and a community is aware that this mother doesn't, that mother has to be catered for, that family has to be catered for. This catering, is for the ummah ultimately, so that the mother can really, in a good environment, nurture their children. So the first duty is the mother's, and success would mean that when the mother passes the child to school, when they go to school, they've passed on to the school a successfully stable, moderate, balanced child. That would be success. Then we have to see how the school now, what they're going to do. Okay, now there's a priority, therefore, to execute motherhood duties over work and profession. Work and profession shouldn't compromise motherhood duties, especially in the first 7 years, and especially in the first 2 years. But this idea of, only giving them a few weeks off, then they have to go to work and send them to the nursery, these things which happen in the West, and then they look down upon the woman. If the woman says, I'm staying at home, they say, oh, our taxes is paying for this? Look at the mentality. They don't even understand anything here, what's happening. A good mother nurturing properly is good for your society ultimately. And you're worried about your taxes. They don't say, well, my taxes are going to you so you can nurture your child properly. It doesn't matter, stay for more with your child. Not a few weeks, a few months. Stay a few years with your child. I will readily give my taxes in this regard. No, they say, why am I giving taxes for you? And the mentality is very perverse in the West. And also it's slowly creeping into the East. So for any community, let's say you go to a desert and you want to start a community, you want that community to start flourishing, here the role of the mother in this nurturing of the child is one of the guarantors, the important guarantees for the salvation of that community. So that community, the first thing they should think of is not for example, the materialistic things. How are we going to pave the roads, do this, do that? The most important is this mother, are they nurturing the child properly? That has to be, hierarchy-wise, top on the list. One shouldn't let the taghuti plan of exiting the mother from the home unit. We shouldn't let this happen. This is problematic. In many places in the West, and even in Iran before the revolution, they would do anything. It was incredible. You may be very surprised. I'm talking of, early 1970s, in the 1960s in Iran, with the king of the time. They made a plan that the mothers have to work. They have to work. And then the mothers would go to these nurseries, although they weren't called nurseries, it was more like child boarding schools. They would take them there. And this was only primarily in Tehran, not on the other cities. The other cities didn't have water, electricity, gas, these kind of basic needs. Tehran was only paid heed to primarily in those days. And they would do everything. It was seen as an honor for the woman, a sign of freedom for the woman to work. And then with a particular clothing. Many of the things you're seeing in the West, Iran had in the 60s and 70s. But it was an Iran which got its culture from America. And it was primarily Tehran though. So the workplace was a place of facade. One can give many stories of things which happened. You would laugh. You would laugh if I was to tell you. You won't believe it. And they would separate the child, therefore, from the mother. They would encourage this. They would definitely distance the mother from her identity, those attributes of perfection which the mother should manifest, and all under the guise of freedom. We're giving you freedom. To freedom meaning that freedom in the West, to do whatever you want. As long as it doesn't bother anyone else, you're free to do whatever you want. Whereas in Islam, freedom means freedom to free your fitrah, so you can actualize your fitrah. Whereas in the West, yes, they're free to do whatever they want, but the fitrah is imprisoned. There's no room place, there's no medium to actualize their fitrah in the West. They're all prisoners. So we're all responsible in relation to the child, but the mother's role is most essential. Imam Khomeini rahmatullah alayhi has said, if you hand over one good child, one nurtured child to society, it's better than the whole world for you. If you nurture one human, this grants such nobility that I, Imam Khomeini, am unable to explain. The laps of mothers are laps wherein humans are produced. The first level of nurturing is that of the child in the mother's laps. And why is this the first? Since the child's affinity to the mother is the greatest of all affinities, and no affinity comes close to the mother-child affinity. Children take lessons from their mothers better than from their fathers, better than from their teachers. The influence that their mothers have is of a different degree. Elsewhere, he has said, distancing the mother from the child in different ways, there are different ways one can do that, leads to an inner disposition of holding onto grudges. When you separate the mother from the child, and this becomes, customary, the child acquires grudges, and that is lethal. When you take away from the child that which it has most affinity towards, you're creating an inner disposition which is that of holding grudges in that child. And that's the beginning of the end. Reversing that is almost impossible. But it's built in the first 7 years. Many of the corruptions and vice, Imam Khomeini says, taking place in society is a direct result of such grudges held onto such children. The cause and origins of this grudge being the separation of the mother from the child. The child needs the mother's love, which can't be replaced or compensated outside the home unit. Robberies, killings, betrayals all stem from such grudges. These grudges arise because this delicate, easily moldable child, an influenceable child that needs motherly love and then is taken away from its source, the mother, to another place, to alien people who cannot be expected to grant the love which the child needs. You see that? It's really incredible. And so, ideally, from 0 to 7, let them be with the mother. Don't rush to take them to nursery. That's the general principle. The first 2 years, even if it's difficult, at least make an effort at sacrifice. Sacrifice at least for the first 2 years. Don't compromise. Even if you can, but it's every woman is different. Maybe for some women they don't have the capacity. We can't force it. Sometimes it may even cause more problems. But if you can do the first 7 years, it really is something important. Now some people, for example, get depression after bearing a child. And that's going to be very difficult for the child, for them, the home unit. And Islam has many protocols of why you got depression in the first place. It has adab, it has etiquettes that had to be abided by pre-conception, pre-procreation. Just going to the midwife or the doctor, that's one part of the story. Why didn't you go to the spiritual clinic before conceiving? And at the end of the day, when you take them to a nursery, who's going to nurture them at the nursery? Who are they? I mean, they're just, it's a job for them, it's money for them. Okay, if it's your maternal aunt, yes, that's the closest to a mother. It's your maternal aunt. That's someone, okay, but it's not like a mother though. If it's grandmother, okay, but it's not like the mother. Yes. Imam Khomeini has said the excellence passed on to children from the mother is qualitatively higher than that passed on to them at school. That which they hear from the mouth and tongue and the body language of mother becomes established into their heart better and easier compared to elsewhere. Okay, I think we'll stop there. So here we see that the importance, inshallah, I've tried to convey. Just one final point is that this is before marriage, when you want to marry, especially for the sister, but the brother has to have this in mind too. When you want to marry, Islam says you have to marry your equivalent, your kuf. But it doesn't give a definition of what your equivalent means. Islam doesn't. And that means, therefore, it's an urfi, common layman's or laity-based definition. And Islam speaks of two things in a spouse. One is taqwa, one is kuf. These two are the most important. Taqwa has many degrees. The minimum is they do their wajibat, refrain from muharramat. And that means they follow a marriage. So one has to marry someone, preferably who says, look, I follow a marriage. Now it doesn't matter who, but they follow the marriage. They don't follow the head of a jamaat, for example. Whatever the marriage says. And they have to be serious in this. And the husband and the wife, they both, it's something If they have that, they have taqwa. Now, taqwa has higher degrees. The more the better. But this is the minimum. The other thing Islam says is they have to be your equivalent. Now here, since it hasn't come with a definition, and it's urfi based, laity based, the scholars have come up with certain parameters, about 15 to 20. And they give these parameters. Now, I don't know them off by heart, but this would be the last session today, so I want to just finish with this. But I have many online. For those who are interested, you can always go online, and the protocols of 0 to 7, 7 to 14, I've spoken about all this, and it's online. But I'll just end with this note, that the parameters, let's say if there are 15, it doesn't have to be a specific number. Some of them, for each individual, may be more important than the other parameters. There may be one or two of these 15, which for me, these are the red lines. The others are important too, but I know myself. These two I can't play around with, because I know myself better. And we don't want tensions arising after the marriage. Your equivalent, they say, your equivalent in age. At the age, let's say 3 to 5 years difference, not to make it too much. It's not wajib. If it's just it's one parameter. Your equivalent in beauty. If one spouse is seen by the common layperson as beautiful and the other spouse is seen a bit below in the common layperson's eyes, they're not equivalent in beauty. It can cause tension later. Your equivalent in IQ. One of them is 144, the other spouse is 80, but has a lot of money. But they're not equivalent in IQ. This causes tensions. Look, none of them individually are, a must or anything. It's a package. It's a package. It has to be all evaluated. But for someone, IQ may be very important. For someone, something else. The equivalence in one of these parameters, one or two of them may outweigh the others. Another is equivalent in culture. One is from this culture, one is from another culture. It may cause tensions. Another is how you look at raising children. This is important. Are you equivalent in this regard too? Another is socializing. There's nothing wrong with that, but someone may be socialized a lot. The other is an introvert, for example. They're not equivalent. It may cause tensions. Respect or how to treat parents. Are you equivalent in this regard? Another parameter is how to tackle a problem. When suddenly a burden arises, what is your decision-making process? Are you equivalent there? There were about 15 to 20 as far as I remember. Now, one or two of them for you may be very important. All of them are important, but some of them you may say, okay, I can overlook this. I know myself. This isn't an issue. Okay, the sister says, I'm 1 year older than that man. It's not an issue. That's not going to affect me. I know myself. Or with the IQ, it's possible they say that won't affect me. But some things they say, no, this does affect me. I'm acquainted, I have an affinity with this particular parameter. There, you would look at that parameter. One of those is this, in raising the child. What is their look? Are you equivalent? If the man was to say, well, go and start working, just give it to my mother. Give the child to my mother, go and start working. Or say, go give it to the nursery, they'll take care of it, we need money. Oh, look at that, see, that's a shame. It's a shame that you're compromising the child's salvation for money, for a better job, for a bigger mortgage. And see, that's embarrassing, that we should refrain from that. Or for example, the man has to see the woman. What's her priority? If she's a professional woman, are you equivalent in what to do if we were to have children? The woman says, well, yes, I have to continue my job though. We'll have the child, no problem. I'll give you one, but the job, I have to continue with the job. Okay, here, the man has to see how important this is. If these matters are of importance to the man, he has to think twice here, rather than the tensions arising after the marriage. These are important for counseling clinics before the marriage, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala tahirin. At what stage?
Let's say, could you give a couple examples on something as simple as hiding in front of your child, contaminating your child's soul?
Hiding? Yes.
Hiding, like arguing.
Oh, right, yes.
And then also something more severe.
Yes.
So are there ways that you would actually involve?
Yes, especially in the first 7 years, the way you interact, husband and wife.
So there's ways to uncontaminate the child.
Now, the degree of uncontaminating is very difficult to evaluate. We can't give numbers to it. We can just minimize it. Yes. But to say to uncontaminate, many things have to arise. And then maybe in the second 7 years, that things have to be done with more severity, for example. But for the first 7 years, yes, the husband and the way they behave with one another. Yes. Sometimes there's no need to socialize too much. If those you're socializing, you see it's a problem. Yes. The family unit, everything is there. Yes.
My question is along the same lines. You touched on how sometimes reversing the damage on the inner disposition of the child is impossible. Say that, if I'm not mistaken. And you said that it's built in the first 7 years. Sometimes in our situation we were not educated of such things. So we now see certain characteristics in the inner disposition of our children. So mine was also similar, that how can I reverse certain things that I see?
Yes, no, it can't be reversed. Yeah, but you can minimize it.
So how, okay.
It's like, for example, a mother and father, let's say they smoked. And they smoked maybe 3 or 4 a day, and the child got a congenital illness, or they didn't have a limb. Such, it happens. Then they're born without a limb. Then they come to the doctor and say, what? And they said, well, did you smoke or drink? They say, yes, but we didn't know. Okay, you didn't know, but that has no effect on, the limb won't come back. With spirituality, it's much worse than this. It's much worse.
I have a follow-up. So from the Tariqa perspective, could it actually hinder the child's potential in reaching certain...
Yes, definitely. Yes.
So what about from the Tariqa perspective? Can you undo it from that?
No, you can minimize it. If by undo you mean a complete reversal, no. Yes. No, we're not ma'soom. It's...
So if you identify as a parent that this is a certain inner condition which I can see has developed,
Yes.
as a result of, so then we have to think about how to minimize
Yes.
the further effects of that, the growth of that.
Yes. Sometimes it may be a bad action. Yes, that bad action can be reversed. What I'm saying can't be reversed is that contamination. So, for example, someone has become addicted to a bad action as a result of bad nurturing. There are techniques, I'm sure, in the medical field where you can reverse that, where they don't do it, but still the soul is contaminated. They may never commit that action again, but the soul is still crippled. And it can be less crippled. They can work on their spirituality, but this is just to highlight the importance of, nurturing, and with the mother, being there as the first teacher and not compromising it.
For example, Maulana, if a child takes something that doesn't belong to them, and they don't seem remorseful.
They don't see it as?
They don't seem remorseful.
How old are they? Yes.
11.
I know, there you have to discipline in the second 7 years. Yeah, the second, I have it online, the lectures, but yes, you have to discipline them in the second 7 years. That doesn't mean hitting or anything, but it's a kind of system of punishment and reward that they know they're not allowed, because now they have rationality, they can understand what you say. So disciplining has meaning.
But does this necessarily mean that the internal condition of the child is there's a problem? Or
No.
psychologically the child is trying to test situation to figure out. Do you understand?
Yes, so one mistake the child makes or does, it doesn't necessarily mean they're, crippled spiritually. It can just be ignorance, they didn't know. Yes, no, that's important. Not with every sin or error they do. Even we do sin, we may sin, we may commit errors now and again. It doesn't mean we have a significant problem, but they have to be disciplined in the second 7 years.
So if more children are developing certain qualities and traits in the years 0 to 7, we let it go? Is that what you're saying?
If they are developing certain traits,
Yeah, like for example,
good or bad?
Bad, like getting angry, for example, or learning to lie, or like things like this.
Yes, well, a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old, they don't understand what lying is yet. It's different to a 7 or 8 or 9-year-old. They may think they know what lying means, but they don't know, even if they do lie, they don't know this is a bad thing. Yes. So you don't discipline in that sense, because they don't understand, they can't rationalize. Being angry, yes, you have to let them be free. Let them, if they start throwing things here and there, disciplining won't be effective. Don't take them to the mosque if you're embarrassed, but don't tell them off at the center or a mosque when they do things. They are practicing, they are learning. They're doing something which we say is bad. Yeah? For example, they throw this on the floor. But if you were to discipline a 2 or 3-year-old for throwing something, well, you put it there in front of them. And then if you were to discipline them, since they can't rationalize that discipline, that's going to have a very bad effect on the child. The whole purpose of the first 7 years is for you to acquire the child's trust in you. So that in the second 7 years, when puberty happens, and all this list of do's and don'ts now have to do, and you tell them that you have to now do this, you have to do that and everything, they say, yeah, we trust this person. He's the same one who let us do everything. Now he's telling us this, we'll listen. But if in the first 7 years you don't earn their trust, and that usually happens because you keep on disciplining them, in the second 7 years it's going to be more difficult. Not impossible, it's going to be more difficult. Most people fail in the second 7 years. Yeah, sorry, yes.
So will these traits carry on to the next 7 years? That's the question.
No, even if they do, they're still benign. Yes. It's mendable very easily, yes.
Maulana, is it only the age we should consider, or also the gender? When you apply this, does it differ for the girls and the boys? Because sometimes
Yes.
understand that when the child becomes spiritually mature, what's recommended Islamically, the girls are younger
Yes.
than the boys. So should this also be a parameter by which we use to discipline the child within those age?
Yes, so the age, when I say 7, I don't mean exactly 7. From 6 to 7, a small, gradual transition. But be you male or female, puberty happens in the second 7 years. But since for sisters it's earlier, here the Sharia now, education-wise, has given religious education-wise when to teach boys and girls. There's a difference there. And with girls, certain things are taught earlier. It's very little, the amount of religious knowledge in the first 7 years. It's very little. We keep on overdosing our children. And for example, they memorize and we ask them to memorize. It's okay if it's done in a playing environment. But if you tell them to memorize through discipline, that can be, it's potentially harmful. So yes, so the age, yes, Islam, when it comes to educating them, it appreciates the gender difference there, and there are slight differences at that point, yes. Yes, so one thing which I may have confused you. So there's some traits that, as the child is growing, like throwing things around, okay, these are not good things if an adult was to do it. Yes, we have to let it go. And these things, we don't discipline, let them be free, and in the second 7 years, these can be amended. What I was speaking of, those things which can't be amended, or those things in the ahadith which say they're an adulterer. Now, what people mean by that is they will commit adultery. No, it means potentially it may pave the way, but a more delicate interpretation is they have an adultery contaminated soul. That's very severe, and that is a vicious legacy for the parents. So these things one has to also know, during having a child. Okay.